Salahdin Part 4 Pitfalls in Syria. Aleppo, Syria, 1175. As the morning sun rose, Salahdin looked at the walled city of Aleppo from a nearby hill. The attack by the assassins on his life the night before had left him perplexed. He had underestimated the shrewdness of Gumushtigin. Salahdin could not imagine that Gumushtigin would hire assassins to kill him. The assassins were a secret group fortifying themselves in the dense mountains of Syria, and they were famous for targeted killings of political personnel of high power in both the Muslim and Crusader ranks. Ideologically, they followed the Shia sect, and thus they did not like Salahdin for abolishing the Fatimid Caliphate. So it was very easy for Gumushtigin to convince the assassins' leader, Rashid ad-Din Sinan, to attack Salahdin. On top of that, more news had recently come to Salahdin that the Crusaders, under the command of Raymond of Tripoli, were gathering forces and raiding the borders of Salahdin's Syrian territory. It was rumored that Gumushtigin had a hand in that as well. All the pieces of the puzzle were now falling into place. Salahdin could see how treacherous Gumushtigin had been. He looked at the citadel of Aleppo. He realized how far away he was from gaining total control of Syria. The capture of Aleppo seemed like a dream now far away. Salahdin had to respond immediately against the threat of the Crusaders. He couldn't risk his life and the loss of his army to continue the siege on a heavily fortified city like Aleppo. In this round, Gumushtigin had won. Salahdin lifted the siege and took his army back to Damascus. From there, he sent forces to deter the raiding Crusaders. Salahdin's recent momentum in Syria caused a lot of jealousy in the Zengid leadership. The emerging leader of the Zengids, Sayf al-Din, was a cousin of Nur ad-Din. So he got the support of Prince as-Saleh and Gumushtigin. Sayf al-Din soon united the quarreling Zengid emirs and solidified his position on a vast territory including Mosul and Aleppo. To weaken the position of Salahdin in Syria, they launched a massive propaganda campaign stating that Salahdin had forgotten his responsibility of freeing Jerusalem from the Crusaders. Salahdin's reputation in Syria as a warrior of the Holy War was heavily damaged because of this. Salahdin was under heavy pressure to take action, but his army was not yet strong enough to recapture Jerusalem, so he devised another plan. Salahdin strengthened his forces in the cities of Horns and Hama in Syria, and from there he could launch skirmishes in the border territories of the Crusader states. These skirmishes were quite successful and in many cases drove Crusaders to withdraw. These victories worked as a checkmate for Salahdin against the Zengid propaganda. Salahdin's popularity soared among the Syrians as never before. In the following weeks, the political and territorial conflict between the Zengids and Ayyubids became so intensified that there was no way to avoid war. The armies met near Hama in March of 1175. Salahdin was vastly outnumbered and had no intention of fighting his fellow Muslims. So Salahdin proposed handing over Homs and Hama to the Zengids and in return asked acknowledgement as the ruler of Damascus on behalf of Princess Saleh. But the Zengids, led by Sayf al-Din, were unmoved. Their reply was, surrender all lands in Syria and return to Egypt. The negotiation failed and the confrontation was unavoidable. Salahdin's military skills and experiences had been greatly boosted by his recent military campaigns. This was reflected in how he arranged his forces to face the stronger opponent. He placed his army at the horns of Hama, hills by the gorge of the Orontes River. As soon as the Zengids attacked, they found themselves fighting the battle uphill and pinned by the river at one side. The Zengids' numerical advantage was nullified. Salahdin launched a strong counterattack with his most veteran soldiers, immediately collapsing one wing of the Zengid army. another wing followed shortly thereafter. The Zengids were surrounded from 3 sides and were thrashed. Another victory for Salahdin. Through tactics and determination, Salahdin would now be able to force the Zengids into a truce. The Zengids conceded that Salahdin should keep his territories in Syria. But the prince would still be in Aleppo under Sayf al-Din's guardianship. Finally, peace among the Muslims in Syria had begun. The victory against the Zengids was a crucial development in Salahdin's political career. After the victory, Salahdin was acknowledged by the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad as Sultan of Egypt and Syria. And as sovereign king, he no longer needed the patronage of the Zengid prince. Both in Cairo and in Damascus, coins were being minted with his official titles, and the Friday prayer sermon in the mosques, or khutbahs, started mentioning him as the sole ruler, omitting the name of a Saleh. This was a decisive move. Officially, Salahdin was no longer a part of the Zengid dynasty. But his good fortune didn't last long. During the summer of 1175, a bad drought made the continuation of fighting with the Crusaders an impossibility. The Crusaders were also hit by the same situation, so they made peace with Salahdin, and there was a pause on ongoing conflicts. Salahdin could take a break from military campaigns and focus on the administration of his vast empire that included Egypt, Yemen, Hijaz, consisting of Mecca and Medina, and Syria. Hardly a year had passed. Political turmoil returned in Syria. Sayf al-Din started looking for trouble in order to fight Salahdin and to gain his territories. So Salahdin gathered his forces and marched northwards from Damascus towards Aleppo. On the way, in a place called Tel al-Sultan, he encountered the army of Sayf al-Din. Salahdin's army was exhausted by their march, but the general lack of leadership and military skills amongst the Zengid leaders caused a delay in initiating the fight. This gave the Ayyubid army an unexpected opportunity to rest and regain their strength. When the fighting finally began the following day, battle-hardened Salahdin took full advantage of the incompetence of the Zengid leaders. As soon as the wings of both armies met one another, Salahdin charged forward at the center. The Zengid soldiers became panicked by this surprising maneuver and failed to keep their formation. The Zengids were decimated and Sayf al-Din narrowly escaped. The whole Zengid war camp, including horses, armors, arms, and baggage trains, were captured by the Ayyubids. All the captured riches were distributed among the soldiers. Salahdin kept nothing for himself, a custom that Salahdin followed in every battle of his life. Sayf al-Din fled to Aleppo. After the battle, Salahdin moved north, capturing more towns in northern Syria from the Zengid command. Eventually, he reached Aleppo region and laid siege to the castle of Azaz, a formidable and strategically important site. One night during the siege, Salahdin was having a discussion with his emirs inside his tent. A man dressed in black suddenly entered the tent and stabbed Salahdin in the head with a knife. Fortunately, Salahdin had been wearing a chainmail hood under his turban, and the first blow slipped and only cut his cheek. Salahdin grabbed the man's knife hand and started to twist. The assassin tried to strike again at Salahdin's neck. The strength and resistance of Salahdin were enough to stop the assassin from landing a lethal blow. Still, the attacker's knife was able to cut through the leather armor on Salahdin's shoulder and inflicted a wound. By this time, the emirs in the tent had fully realized what was going on and came forward to rescue their sultan. The assassin was struck down by them. While all of this was going on, a second and third assassin rushed into the tent and started attacking the emirs, but the chaos and screaming had alerted the guards. They came running and killed the assassins. Salahdin's wounds were not severe, but he was profoundly shaken. He realized how serious of a threat the assassins had become. He immediately took precautions and raised guards around the camp to prevent any intruders from entering unnoticed. After a month of siege, the castle of Azaz fell. Now, Aleppo was completely surrounded. Salahdin didn't want to launch a full-fledged attack and destroy the city. This would cause a lot of bloodshed on both sides, and Salahdin didn't think it would be wise to prolong the campaign against his fellow Muslims unnecessarily. So when the Zengids in Aleppo offered a truce and proposed more territorial control to Salahdin, he accepted their offer. The whole of northern Syria came under the Ayyubid dynasty except Aleppo. Now came time to settle scores with the assassins. Salahdin launched a campaign into the territories occupied by the assassins. Soon he reached the castle of Masyaf, which belonged to the assassins' leader himself, Rashid ad-Din Sinan. Salahdin laid siege to the castle. Day after day, Salahdin sent his army to occupy the castle. Every time, the assassins resisted fiercely. The siege became long and bloody, but Salahdin was relentless, wanting to see the end of it. So the fight continued. Finally, the assassins gave up and offered to make peace. Salahdin now had two choices. He could either accept the peace or could continue the siege. The castle of Masyaf was a tough defensive site, fortified with walls and towers placed on top of a mountain. Continuing the capture of the castle would mean that Salahdin would have to accept great losses and significantly weaken his army. This would give the Crusaders and the Zengids opportunities to make moves against him. After considering these factors, Salahdin took the wiser route. He accepted the truce. A treaty was signed. Rashid ad-Din Sinan promised not to attack Salahdin ever again and swore his allegiance. Although the assassins were not completely wiped out, Salahdin still could neutralize the threat of the assassins. Salahdin could turn an enemy into a strength, one less enemy to worry about. Finally, the situation in Syria was stable. The Zengids were no longer a threat. The assassins were under control, and the Crusaders had stopped their raids. Salahdin now had a brief period of peace. He could finally focus on preparing for his ultimate goal, Jerusalem. He returned to Cairo, focused on fortification of his territories on different fronts, reorganized his army, and started planning a full-on offensive against the Crusaders to win back Jerusalem. After years of political struggle and bloodshed with his fellow Muslims, Salahdin thought now he would be able to achieve his ultimate goal. Little did he know that he would soon have to flee the battlefield, narrowly escaping death. This was Salahdin's first major campaign against the Crusaders, and it resulted in the most devastating defeat of his life at the Battle of Montgisard.